We have made our way from the FCL to Bradenton, up to Greensboro, across the way for me, but up to Altoona. Now we're going the opposite direction, heading out to Indianapolis, bringing back the voice of the Indianapolis Indians, Jack McMullen at Jack underscore McMullen 11. Also, Just Baseball Media talking about your time out there in Arizona with them. A lot of good stuff coming from you and Aram. A lot of video highlights and everything. How you doing, brother?
I'm good. I've been bouncing around time zones a little bit. So went from Eastern in Indianapolis to Pacific in Arizona to Central and Austin, Texas, and now I'm back in Milwaukee now. So this is Central. I got to get used to the non-Eastern time thing, but it's been good. It's like I thought that I was going to hit a hard stop after the AAA season concluded. Didn't really get to, but now I feel like we're right there on the cusp of like, oh, let me get a week. You know what I mean?
Oh, you got a little bit of time here. Can enjoy the World Series
For
and
sure.
wait for all of the stuff to start happening. I mean, obviously, some Rule Five prep across the board. Not so much for the Pirates this year, maybe, but we will get into some guys that they may have added, who they were going to have to make decisions on anyway. But we're talking about the Indianapolis Indians, 77 and 74th in the West. Came on fairly strong towards the end of the season, was making a run at like the second half championship. Obviously, didn't end up happening, but
Yeah.
overall, I would say an interesting season for the Indians this year.
Yeah, I think so. I think you could probably split it into thirds, to be totally honest with you, because at the beginning of the year, they had a couple of the best bats in the International League, and they had the best arm in minor league baseball, and maybe the best arm in all of baseball, if you want to like have that conversation. But front third of the season was the Paul Skeens show every sixth day, and Nick Gonzalez and G1 Bay really hitting the crap out of the ball. And Gonzalez, like he proved that the adjustments were tangible and real, and he was there to stay. And when he got up, he proved that he was there to stay. So that was the front third of the season. The middle third of the season, we had an autograph. We had an autograph night at the ballpark, and I was just looking. I was like, "Who's going to be the hot commodity here?" We didn't have a single top 30 prospect of the Pirates, according to Pipeline there. So I was like, I don't know who the hot commodity is here. So it was kind of a lull when it came to prospect intrigue. And then the back third of the season was when we got Bubba Chandler and Thomas Harrington from Altoona, and Nick York and Billy Cook via trade. So I would say it was a season of three thirds, and two thirds of it were really intriguing. The summer months was the summer months. It's nice. You start to get that summer weather, and like, you know what? That's the saving grace.
Yeah, and I mean, people still came out and packed the ballpark, but I mean, I'm going to stick to the hitting here for a second. The
Yep.
one thing that kind of intrigued me about this team is they hit for average. 271 overall average, 255 is the league average.
Yep.
And that was first, in the league, which to me is kind of crazy. The OPS was sitting right around six at 778. Didn't have a ton of power, 142 home runs, 17th in the league. I don't know what to make of it because usually in baseball, I mean, the OPS is really, really good, but to see like an average that's sitting around what would be for a pretty good major league hitter for your team,
Yeah.
it looked like they did have a fairly good hitting team across the board, even when some of the big names disappeared.
Yeah. Now counter to that is hitting was up across the league. Like league average OPS was in the high 700s. I want to say it was like 770 something. So that like you should take that into account as well. I know that they, like posted the highest average in the league, and relative to the rest of the league, and the thing is like everybody's playing in the same environments against the same pitchers. So they were the best batting average team in the league, but we know that batting average is only a small piece of the pie when it comes to offensive production. The most important number is runs scored. The Indians, unfortunately, did not lead the league in that, but some other good. I guess benchmarks would be, are you hitting homers? Unfortunately, the answer was no for the majority of the season. So the slug was down. They were walking a little bit, but they weren't walking with the best in the league. So when you look at numbers like OPS and team homers, they're not near the top, but batting average is great. And you love singles and some doubles here and there. So I think the Indians, they did a good job of leaning into the bat to ball. There really weren't too many nights where it felt like nobody could touch it. And that's important. Like, you give yourself a chance to win. So I would just say, like, yeah, they hit well, but everybody seemed to hit well in AAA this year, because the pitching was really bad, if we're gonna be honest. I saw a lot of 89-mile-an-hour fastballs, a lot.
And that's the weird part is, and before we get into like the individual players, because I was gonna go, just into the individual hitter performance, but I mean, going into that pitching, I looked at it. The Indians had an average age of their pitching staff was 28 years old.
Yeah,
And that was second oldest in the league. You're talking about, a league average whip of like 1.458. The Indians were just slightly below that. League average ERA was like 4.83. They were slightly above that. But yeah, I mean, we did have some stars, like you mentioned, like a Bubba Chandler, Thomas Harrington, obviously Paul Skeens. But when we were looking down, it's like, okay, who's going to be coming up? I mean, Mike Burrows ended up making his way back. Unfortunately, Braxton Ashcraft getting injured and stuff.
yeah.
But yeah, pitching in AAA was extremely weird this year.
Yeah, I mean, big league average ERA, I think, was like 4.07 or something like that. And you mentioned AAA or international league average was 4.83. So 4.83, I have the MLB average here. It's 4.07. So we're talking about a league where pitching's about to run up, like on each side. You're getting on average 2 runs a game more in the earned run department than you're getting at the major league level. So was it walks? Yeah. Was it base hits? Yeah. Was it lack of strikeouts? No. I think it was just, like, whip was up, man. There was a lot more foot traffic in AAA. So, I mean, credit to the Indians for taking advantage of that this year.
Yeah, and like I said, there was some very exciting pitching. I mean, obviously, Skeens at the beginning of the year. We had you on to kind of preview that. We had you on when he was called up.
Yeah.
But then, I mean, Bubba comes up. So it's like another thing from like the previous year where I look at like everybody's talking about like the Jared Jones trajectory. And with Bubba, it kind of felt the same to a degree just because, you know, he's so young, same with Jones,
Yeah.
getting called up and the moment not looking too big for him. And his numbers actually seem to him and Harrington to a degree, their numbers just seem to get better and better as they moved up through, which is
Yeah.
not taking a step back at all.
No, not one bit. Josh Wetzel is the radio announcer for the Red Wings in Rochester, which is the Nats AAA affiliate, and he does some fill-in work with the Nats as well. And he popped into the booth during the last homestand of the year and said, "Hey, this is a weird question, but I feel like there's not a clear-cut answer. Who do you like more, Jared Jones or Bubba Chandler?" And I was like, "Oh." Because I really just wanted to say, "Oh, Jones," obviously, like, Jones was succeeding in the big leagues. But I'm like, you know what? Like, Bubba's got that, man. And we talk about Jones's fastball characteristics, where he's a small guy that extends so well, and he gets the good induced vertical break, vert for short. Like, if you hear the term vert, it means that the fastball is going to play well up in the zone because it's taking off and quote unquote defying gravity more than your typical fastball does. It stays on plane from a low release. That's what Bubba does too. And I mean, Jones ran it up to 100. Bubba can run it up to 100, and Bubba can snap off a breaking ball, and Bubba flashes a better changeup than Jared Jones. Jones proved that he can do it at the big league level, so of course he has the edge at this point. But Bubba was much better in AAA than Jared Jones was in AAA, and starts didn't get away from Bubba the way that they got away from Jared Jones. Now, you did see some innings start to spiral a little bit on Bubba, like, a leadoff walk in turn results in the bases loaded, which in turn results in a run coming in or 2 runs coming in, but then he bounces back with a clean fourth if that happened in the third. Um, I do think that there might be some like, final things to iron out in the first month of next year, and that could just be, hey, quick memory, like let's work on compartmentalizing quote unquote failure on the mound and working on the next guy. But I mean, what Bubba showed was as encouraging as anybody, and I think Bubba was. It's going to sound crazy. I think it was as impressive as Skeens because it was utter domination. We didn't get to see Skeens stretched out in AAA. We saw Bubba stretched out, and Bubba stretched out was, I mean, those were the most impressive pitching performances that we got in an Indianapolis Indians uniform this year. And that's no indictment on Skeens because he only went 5 innings max. Bubba went 7.
It was very cool to watch, and I mean, for me, I not that I root for like the little guy or the guy that isn't on top of the mountain at that point in time, but maybe I do in some ways. But Thomas Harrington has always had,
I love him.
something that I love to watch because I mean, some of these guys we talk about as they come up through the ranks, they have to get their polish on. Like they get to the, AAA and they get their final polish put on. And to me, it feels like that Harrington has been polished almost since the time that he arrived in professional baseball, which is very weird to say. And a guy that doesn't have to adjust from being a thrower to being a pitcher. It just feels like being a pitcher is just inside of him.
He was a pitcher at Campbell. Like he was, I mean, he was a shortstop at Campbell, but then like you saw in his draft year when he went 36th overall, I want to say it was like comp A or comp B, something like that. But Harrington, like he was already a pitcher when the Pirates took him. So you don't worry about that. You don't worry about converting a fastball slider guy into someone that has pitchability. Like they took the pitchability guy. And there are very few guys that go in the first 2 rounds that are pitchability guys like that. You typically see the 4-year starter in the Pac-12, like Quinn Matthews, the Cardinals now. Quinn Matthews was a senior at Stanford, and he was a pitchability guy, and the stuff ticked up. This gets, this could open a whole nother can of worms in terms of my thinking about pitching development now. I think it's probably easier to develop stuff as opposed to developing pitchability. I feel like there are more resources available to help stuff tick up, whether that's a driveline throwing program with weighted baseballs, whether that's, optimization and everybody puts the sensors on the shirtless guy throwing a bullpen. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can do, but Harrington has this innate feel for the strike zone and an innate feel to manipulate the baseball and get it to land where he wants. And he can do it at a high enough speed. I loved watching that guy. And I thought, Bubba put together probably the most impressive outing that I've seen at the AAA level, but Harrington was not far behind when he went 7 innings and 64 pitches or something like that. It was absolutely nuts what he did, and I think this guy can be a fan favorite when he gets up to Pittsburgh, and I think that he can be a guy that, assuming his body holds up, can be that Keller type throwback where he's logging 180 innings, 190 innings in a given season.
Yeah, and that's what I see from him is just that. I mean, I don't feel like that he gets lost, but feel like in some ways maybe he does, just because, you know, it's like chicks dig the long ball, chicks
Yeah.
dig the fastball. Do you know what I
No,
mean? So it's
I
like,
think I think what Harrington is victim of is people penciling him into the 5 spot right now, as opposed to like the chance to climb higher. Skeens is sharpied in as the 1, right? Keller and Jones here, and then Bubba, and then Harrington. Like that's the 5 spot. And it's a Harrington Ortiz conversation. I'm totally with you. Like Harrington is a singles hitter, but guess what? Like he sets the table. He's hitting 300 on the mound.
yeah, it's definitely very cool. And the one thing that we did talk about earlier in the season, I was listening back to us, is that we talked about, possibly, Burrows being that guy that could be used in the bullpen at the end of the year. Obviously, kind of didn't happen. Did get, his cup of coffee, but looked impressive for the most part in the way that he was doing it. But I mean, everybody knows he's going to have to be stretched out more, or possibly put into, we're talking about an Ortiz type thing, role at the beginning of next year. But I
Yeah.
did like to see, Mike Burrows make it through the full season, get that cup of coffee. And, just from what he had been through, from being a guy who was one of, like, he was the top prospect in the
Yeah.
system, to being, once again, like these guys, we just have so much pitching. I don't want to say an afterthought, but I mean, it was just like, oh yeah, we have Mike Burrows too, and it's like he throws some really good stuff.
Yeah, no, this is based on absolutely zero intel, but I'd be kind of surprised if he was on Indy's opening day roster. I think he should be on the Pirates opening day roster, and I think he should be that hybrid swingman that Luis Ortiz was. I think about what the rotation is going to look like at the start of next year, and it would be Skeens, Jones, Keller, uh, Luis Ortiz, and then probably falter, I guess. And then after that, you've got Burrows as the swingman here, and you got Bubba and Harrington starting in AAA. You also have to think about a guy like a Braxton Ashcraft who was dealing with a ton of injury over the course of the back half of the year, and then Hunter Barco, who is understandably so limited in terms of his inning output coming off of Tommy John surgery. Like you have a lot of starting pitching options here. If Burrows can show you that he's really good as a 2 inning reliever, why not just do that? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And he's got the stuff to do it. I mean, when we
Yeah.
talk about the stuff, like it's, he has what would be, a 2 to 3 pitch mix that he could excel at. And
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that that closes the door, as we saw with Ortiz. That does not close the door on, being a starter. It's just optimizing him in a different role. And you mentioned Ashcraft because, I mean, it was disappointing to see, how the end of the year turned out for him just with not being able to stay healthy. But I mean, hopefully avoiding, any type of major,
Right.
injury and everything. So, I mean, he's just another guy that, it fills in at some point in time as well next year. I mean, there's just a plethora of options.
Yeah, no doubt.
And that's where we get maybe a little bit depressing here as we turn to the hitting side. And that kind of seems to be, a lot of the conversations that I've been having, with you, with John, with Andy, the whole way down to Thomas and stuff. Thomas actually had probably one of the more exciting ones because of the guys, coming up from the FCL, a lot of the international players and stuff.
Yeah.
But we saw guys perform in Indianapolis, but it's also guys that we've seen in Pittsburgh as well, a great number of them.
Yeah.
Henry Davis, Jack Sawinski, G1 Bay, Alika Williams.
Yeah.
And we've seen Sawinski hit 26 home runs, but then we've seen him, kind of fall back and go back down to AAA. And I assumed would get it together a little bit more than he did.
Yeah.
But it just gets thrown around right now a lot here in the Pittsburgh circles is that, I mean, these guys are all getting quad A player type, things. But I'm just wondering, like you said, like the pitching was down there. You get up to the majors, it's a huge adjustment, and it may take one or two more times going up and down for it to finally click.
You think about the best rookies in Major League Baseball this year. Merrill started pretty well. Best rookie hitters, I'm talking, not pitchers, because Imanaga was amazing right away. Yamamoto was amazing right away. And obviously, those guys come from a different situation than a Skeens and even a Rhett Lauder in Cincinnati, who started really well right away. But um, the rookie hitters that like struggled out of the gates and then really turned it on at the end. Like Jackson Choreo is the best example. That guy's a borderline superstar now. Like he's a top 5, top 10 outfielder in Major League Baseball going into next year. He was terrible for the first 2 months of his big league career. Jackson Holliday was terrible his first go around in the big leagues. Kobe Mayo in Baltimore was terrible his first go around in the big leagues. These guys are like borderline shell shocked when they get up there and they see the best stuff that they've ever seen by a country mile. The separation was nowhere near as big as this in recent years. And I don't know what it is. Like, could it be, the slashing of 2 rungs on the minor league ladder? It could be. I have no idea. But like, I think it takes just a pure like ball player to make that adjustment right away. And frankly, I think Pittsburgh found 2 of them in Cook and York. Like those were the 2 guys. And you want to play the quantity over quality game. I understand that you'd rather have a top 10 prospect in baseball, but if you stock your organization with a whole bunch of Nick Yorks and Billy Cooks, you're going to be in a pretty good spot. Like I think both those guys earned a spot on that opening day roster next year, barring injury or like brutal showings in spring training and something's like really off. Um, it seems like they kind of sprayed the board in terms of, hey, we need help at the big league level. Who's going to help us at the big league level? And the two guys that were new to the organization happened to be the two guys that they deemed helpful at the end of the year, and I thought they showed really well up there in the big league. So, yeah, like it's fun to see Sawinski swinging, and it's fun to see Henry Davis log a 1050 OPS in AAA, but we've seen him fail several times at the major league level. We just have yet to see York and Cook really fail at the major league level. So, keep giving them run. That's the idea when it comes to AAA depth. You're either going to have a bunch of prospects there, or you're going to have a bunch of guys that you can try at some point, and whatever you throw at the wall that sticks, you leave it on the wall.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's where, like, I mean, people kind of get frustrated with Charrington at times, and believe me, I do too. And he talks about, the amount of depth that they have in the organization. I think that people, when they think it's not saying you're talking about the quantity over quality. I think there is a decent amount of quantity, especially if you have, Jack Sawinski, who has shown some success at the major leagues. You have Henry Davis, who has hit the crap out of AAA pitching, and you're still hoping as a player can be able to develop. Bay, Palacios, Alika, Peguero. I mean, you have all of these guys.
Yeah.
It's just that you were saying you don't have that breakout superstar, that Bobby Witt Jr. or the Jackson
Right.
Churias or something like that, to maybe push them over the top. But when your pitching is so strong, if you just have a bunch of, I mean, I don't want to put a number on it, but let's say 2 to 3 war players or a lot of role players that aren't going to hurt you, and you have the pitching that you have. I mean, there's teams that have done it with that as well.
Yeah, you can contend in a bad division with that. And I'm not saying that the NL Central is an objectively bad division, but it's not the AL East, it's not the NL West. Like the Brewers, yeah, the Brewers were good this year. Brewers had like one starting pitcher for 3 months, two starting pitchers, if you count like a Tobias Myers, and then they just kind of mishmashed the rest of it. So like that division seems firmly up for grabs. And I feel like the Cubs are going to be pretty aggressive this go around, but it's not like the St. Louis Cardinals are prioritizing big league success right now. They just announced that, they're pouring a ton of their assets into minor league development. So it seems like they are hitting as much of a rebuild as St. Louis ever has. Pittsburgh and Cincinnati are ticking up right now. This is your opportunity to take control of the National League Central. And I don't know if you do it with 2 to 3 win players. I think you do it with a couple 5-win players and then those 2 to 3 win players. And you got to figure out who those 5-win players are. Is it an O'Neill Cruz in center field? Could very well be, no doubt. Could it be Brian Reynolds at first base if, that's the move? Could very well be. He's an all-star level hitter. And then do you look externally? Like Tyler O'Neill's on the market. I know a lot of people want that guy in Pittsburgh, but, like he might cost a lot. If they're willing to spend an O'Neill, a Teoscar Hernandez would obviously be a perfect fit, but he's going to cost a pretty penny. But even somebody like Alex Verdugo, who hits the open market, who's to say that he can't be a 3.5-win player next year and really help you? So I do think that it's going to come down to complementing the pieces that you already have there. Andy Rodriguez is coming back. Andy looked good in AAA at the end of his rehab assignment. And he's going to catch that staff. And just finding the bats to complement a Cruz and a Reynolds and Isaiah Kiner-Falefa could be a 3-win player as well. You have no idea.
Yeah, and the other thing is, it was just kind of going into my head because I mentioned him at the end of there was Peguero, because I
Mm-hmm.
mean, with Cook and York, they were guys. I mean, normally at this point in time, we're having like the Rule 5 draft conversation, and who do we protect?
Yeah.
And I think with Cook and York, kind of being called, I mean, they were like obvious guys.
Yeah.
You acquired them at the deadline; they were going to be added. And then now we have Peguero, who I think was protected, was it 3 years ago, 4 years ago at this point.
Ooh,
I mean, it's
I think 3 years ago. So he'd be hitting his final option year, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah. And I went to Ethan Houlihan at one point in time, and I think he was possibly going to get a 4th option. I don't understand that type of stuff. That's why I go to him. So that's why I was trying to figure out how many years ago it was. And it's a guy who, I mean, has gotten some looks at the major league level, but I mean, he does have a lot of good attributes. His defense has gotten better. He does have the pop that some other guys may not, and I believe that they thought that once Ono Cruz was going to center the outfield, which was discussion, it kind of seemed to be that up here in Pittsburgh, we thought, okay, well, Peguero step into that. And over, the last year, he did put it together at different points in time during this year, but
Yeah.
the overall numbers, I mean, just didn't look great.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. Like I think this season was a little weird for him because he was bouncing around a little bit between short and second and all that stuff. And you're right. Like we would be having the 40-man conversation right now, but there's just not really a 40-man conversation to be had at the moment, which is funny. But yeah, I would say like this year was a net positive for him, and he was the Indians team MVP this year. A, because he was there the entire year, but B, because like at the end of the day, this guy was producing situationally, and I do think that he can hold down shortstop. Feel like that's going to be a question next year, especially with O'Neill Cruz just in center full time. Like, hey, who gets IKF off his feet? Is it Alika? Well, Peguero's got a way better bat. Can it be York? Well, York is just learning how to play shortstop at the pro level. He just did it for the first time in like late August. So there's a question to that. I would say if you want to roster a backup shortstop, what else does he need to do to be the backup shortstop? I don't think there's much else.
Yeah, and especially since I mean he was in the fight for the starting second base position last year. I mean Jared Triolo just kind of had performed in the major leagues, balled out in spring training, and was just a guy. It was like him, Nick Gonzalez, and Triolo. So Peguero wasn't like he was doing anything poorly. And
Yeah.
so that's just a guy. And here's the thing is if he does have that extra option or if he does have an option year, that's when I talk about that depth. It's not a bad thing to have a guy with that type of power who I believe has improved immense defensively over the past few years in your back pocket. That to me, that is depth.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So, I mean, this was a long conversation about a team that, I mean, it looked different. Like you said, the tale of 3 seasons for them. But for anybody that doesn't, please go follow Jack McMullen at Jack_McMullen11. Go follow Just Baseball Media, doing great stuff over there. Follow the at Indie Indians. I believe they're doing another wallpaper Wednesday today that I saw there. They didn't do mine last time, but it's
Sad.
understandable. I don't need it every time. I want the fans to get it, even though I am a fan. I'll give it to them before me. But Jack, it's always a pleasure, brother. And before you know it, we will be doing the preview for next season.
Craziness. Always a pleasure talking to you, my man. Heck of a season.
Absolutely.
A pitcher of beer, a pitcher of beer. Let's order another pitcher of beer. That pitcher of beer should come over here. I love that pitcher of beer.
I was just talking about how I hadn't had any Oktoberfest this year. Went out to Maze Craze. I think that's the East Palestine area of Ohio with the family. Walked up to the beer tent and got myself, it's from Noble Creature Wild Ales and Lagers in Youngstown, the Faust beer. And it was the first one that I had had all year. Tasted really good, coming in at 5.5%. Give that one a 425, knock it down to 375. So I went out and got myself 3 more, 2 that I had before to kind of compare it against, and one that I hadn't. The first one I had a bunch of times in the past. It's the Victory Fest beer, their Marzen style lager, 5.6%. Give that one a 450, knock it down to 400. Fatheads, one of my favorites here. Their Oktoberfest, the Bavarian style fest beer, coming in at 5%. Great light beer drinkability for an Oktoberfest. Give that one a 450 as well. Knock it down to 400. And then from Pittsburgh Brewing Company, the Iron City Icy Light Company, coming out with Herman's Best Oktoberfest, coming in at 6.2%. I'm going to tell you, if you didn't have this and could find it somewhere, I was pleasantly surprised because it gave the same number as the other ones. Give that one a 450, knock it down to 400. And until next time, everybody, let's go Scottsdale Scorpions and, go out there and watch some World Series baseball and dream about when the Pirates are there or if the Pirates are there, hopefully at some point in time.